As soon as I took my foot off the gas, I started hearing, are you giving up? Are you going to be bored all day?
Why do you think that there's this prevailing narrative that there is only one way to be successful or to be ambitious?
The reality of modern women today is that 1 in 3 women who pause their careers feel forced to pause because of the cost of childcare. And that's not to say that working out of the home is a luxury. It's to say that the privilege is to get to choose.
It's a little bit scary going from being a 2-income household to a 1-income household or 1.5 income, and figuring out what your contributions are and making sure that you're not feeling like it's all on you in some way.
I think even scarier than that is the idea of being a financial dependent.
It's not fair, but parenthood has a bigger impact on a woman's career than a man's. After becoming mothers, women often find themselves rethinking their ambitions.
We are always going to be challenged to have to align our time and our energy with shifting priorities.
How careers evolve after children is a big question. You need to think about finances, your own relationship to work, your dreams for your family, and for yourself. My guest today has been working to change the narrative around ambition, career pauses, and downshifts. Neha Ruch is the author of The Power Pause, a game-changing approach to modern motherhood and how we talk about women's ambition. I'm Lindsey Stanberry, and this is Family Money. I've been interviewing people about their money stories for more than a decade, and I've been a mom for just about as long. Needless to say, I have lots of thoughts on kids and money.
You really talk about how women tend to feel uncomfortable talking about money.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is?
It's scary, right? I hear from people who want to have kids all the time. How do you actually afford to have a kid? But that's why we're here. That's what we're doing with Family Money. We're offering you advice and tips and tricks, and you're going to hear from amazing experts to help put you at ease. Welcome to Family Money. Neha, I'm so excited to have you here today.
Thank you for having me. You know, the Power Pause started as such a small project with a really big idea 10 years ago. I had my first son, like you, in 2016. It was the height of the Lean In movement, the height of the girl boss era, and I had him, and there was something about rocking with him that just gave me this moment of, after so long of trying to climb in professional life, in social life, if I'm being honest, I just felt so at peace. I felt like this kid didn't want me to be anything more than who I was. And that felt freeing. Yeah. And I wanted to settle into that and see what that opened up for me. I wanted more time with him. My husband was working a ton at the moment. So it just felt right for a number of reasons for me to downshift my career. So initially I went part-time. As soon as I took my foot off the gas, I started hearing, are you giving up? Are you going to be bored all day? We'd been handed this very linear version at that point of what success was, what ambition was, what being in the workforce was. And I was looking around and I was meeting so many incredible women in playgroups and play spaces, and each of them represented this very different version of womanhood that we'd seen before, right? There were women who had clocked in 10 years in banking and were taking a sabbatical. There was someone who had been 15 years in merchandising at Scoop who had just been laid off and saying, like, maybe I'll freelance for a bit. There were so many women making room for motherhood. And yet they were all on the other side of some sort of like unwelcome commentary like I was. And so when I started digging around, I realized there was just such incredible content bolstering the modern woman working out of the home. There were so many representations of that woman, but we had somehow left behind women who were taking their foot off the gas for a chapter for family life in the 1970s. And so I started this work then, and over 10 years, it's definitely grown to be able to really shift the narrative to better represent the dynamic reality of women making really bold choices to shift career for chapters.
Do you think that ambition changes after you have children, or do you think that it evolves?
I think ambition is always evolving. I think it's a living thing. And we've been, so much of this work is really rethinking everything from ambition to feminism to financial dignity. And I think starting with ambition, we really believed that ambition was tied to your career and your salary. And so, of course, if you part with either of those things, you are left with this feeling of, am I giving up on my ambition? And I think what we've come to learn and have had to learn as women navigating a really interesting childcare market, really complex parenting issues, elder care, sandwich generation parenting, and mental health, physical health, we're realizing the reality of ambition is it has to make room for the reality of a long game of life. And so we are always going to be challenged to have to align our time and our energy with shifting priorities.
Yeah.
And I think ambition is that determination really to do things that we care about and recalibrate how we're spending that time in alignment with our values over and over again, which means that my version of ambition might not look like your version of ambition.
I think that that's a good point, that our versions of ambition can be so different. But why do you think that there's this prevailing narrative that there is only one way to be successful or to be ambitious?
A lot of it comes down to what we've seen in the media for a really long time.
Yeah.
I think it's very tied, especially for women, to second wave feminism, which did so much incredible work for us, right? Like we cannot discount what it did in bolstering women's careers. And I think the climax of that was the Lean In rallying cry, right? And so from, call it 1970 to through the early aughts into the 2010s, we really saw an updated representation of women in the workforce. But what it did was it sort of kept separate women and family life, right? And if you date back to the 1970s, there was a lot happening at that moment.
Right.
And, we had seen women enter the workforce and women were saying, we want more of this.
I'm so curious about those conversations that you were having, on the playground and with other moms that you met. Was it worry? Was it concern? Was it a desire? Sometimes when I feel like there's not representation, I imagine that this is what inspired you, is like, how do we start telling these different stories? I'm curious, what were the stories that you were hearing?
I think a lot of it was women feeling really clear about their own decision, like deep down felt, whether it was for finances, whether it was the very valid want to spend more time with their kids, whether it was wanting space to build their next thing because they were just burned out with whatever they were doing for sort of the 20 years previously. They felt really clear and felt really, really judged by other people for that choice. And I think that disconnect between the outer noise and their inner worlds is really hard to hold, right? Because I think we all ultimately want to be understood. We all want to belong. And for a lot of women, myself included, I'm sure you too, our work identities, especially in our 20s and 30s, gave us a sense of identity and a sense of belonging. And it was a way of proving our ambition and proving facets of our personality, that we were multi-hyphenated, right? Like, so if you asked me what I did in, 2017, 2016, I would say I run brand at a tech company. In 5 words, I've told you I run. So I'm a leader, brand, I'm creative, tech startup, like I'm somewhat like ahead of the curve. So I've somehow allowed myself a place in the conversation. And I think when women felt like, if I don't have that in this world, in this generation, who am I? Am I a nobody? Do I belong in these conversations? I sat at a breakfast where no one asked me a single thing once, peers of mine, because they were so nervous about making me feel ashamed about my days at home.
Right.
And what people were missing, and I think so much of the work since then has been about shining a light that my days were just as dynamic, if not more so, right? And the women I was meeting were, and the women we've since assembled in the platform community were meeting really interesting other women. They were sparking new ideas. They were tinkering with things that maybe they hadn't gotten to. They were doing some personal growth work that maybe they'd shelved for 20 years in finance. And suddenly they were like, maybe I should work on that reactionary part of my personality, right? And so suddenly women who were sort of, fumbling through the identity piece were challenged to figure out, well, who am I if I don't have that? And that was the exciting piece that actually lends to a lot of possibility.
So let's take a quick break here. And when we come back, let's dig into the financial dignity of all of this.
Great.
Okay, so we're back. It's a little bit scary going from being a 2-income household to a 1-income household or 1.5 income, and figuring out what your contributions are and making sure that you're not feeling like it's all on you in some way.
Yeah, I think even scarier than that is the idea of being a financial dependent.
Right.
I think when you poll American women on career pauses, I believe the number one fear was becoming a financial dependent and giving up that sense of power.
Yeah.
And so a lot of the work that we've done is tried to rethink, well, how do we, if we do have to, need or want, by the way, to pause, how do we do that where we can walk through feeling safe? And my husband always says that he inspired this chapter in the book because he made this one fatal mistake of saying to me that it was a luxury to stay at home.
Oof.
And by the way, he's a wonderful partner who's very progressive. I should give you that caveat. But he said that during a budgeting meeting. And I said, well, I think it's actually a luxury for you to be able to get on a plane for a business trip without thinking about who's going to take care of the kids, who's going to submit the school admissions form, who's going to plan the doctor's visit, who's going to manage the research about that weird rash that the kids have gotten, right? And so I think in that moment, what we started to really have to dissect between ourselves was this idea of interdependence. Yes, I, at that period, was depending on his income that he was contributing.
Right.
But he was able to single task in the workforce because of the work I was doing in the home.
Yeah. And it's huge. I mean, it's not
huge.
to be underestimated.
It's not just diapers and laundry. And I
No.
think part of the reason we as a culture have undervalued childcare is because we think of it as diapers and laundry.
Yeah.
When in reality, it really is the managing through medical issues. It is facilitating community around these children. It is looking into the right type of education and enrichment to keep these kids progressing the way we want to and managing the fallout if they're not. I think the sort of way in which we have to lead these children into lives where they can be independent, resilient children, it's become much more intensive.
Yeah.
For
so
better or
intensive.
for worse.
Right.
And the climate is much more, there are challenges around every bend. And I think caregiving is an intellectual and emotional labor that has been written off for way too long.
You really, I mean, just the management skills of a child's like educational calendar. Like all week we were trying to remember to write my son a note for state testing to congratulate him on it. You know, it's just like, it seems like such a small thing, but it really piles up after a while.
Well, and it's interesting. In recent years, I've been, obviously I've navigated fully pausing, part-time work, full-time work again. Now I'm somewhere in between. And I always think it's less about the time and it's so much about the headspace.
Right.
Because there's this whole other side of parenthood, which is not with your child, but it's the facilitating and the administration and the choreography of life around to create a safe, fulfilling environment for everyone involved. So all of that to say, I think the conversation my husband and I had was the foundation of a big part of this work, which is that when women step into a career shift of any sort, whether it's a downshift, whether it's a pivot into something more entrepreneurial with less income, whether it is a full pause, ideally before, but at any point, it is crucial to establish that communication with the partner to decide if I'm making this shift, we together are agreeing that it allows the whole system to function better. And there's a value for the work that I'm contributing, paid or not paid. And in that way, we are interdependent. And the reason why it's so crucial to establish that is because then later on, when you're saying, well, let's look at our budget for the year, do we as a system, do we as a household system benefit from actually having childcare, like maybe 15 hours of childcare to allow me breaks? And suddenly the conversation is not about, okay, well, I'm not working for pay, so I don't deserve help. It's what do we as a household want to do to invest our shared household income against values that are important to our family? I think that level of safety and dignity comes from deciding that household income is shared no matter who is contributing and how.
Which I think even if you have two incomes, you should be looking at them as a shared family income rather than his and hers or hers and hers or his and his.
And I would add that I think one of the best things we did, and I lay this out in the book, but I think the short of it is we sat down even before we had kids.
Yeah.
As soon as we became a household and started budgeting for our family, we immediately started treating our home like an organization because that's what it is, right? And so we would look at, okay, well, this is the income in, and then there's going to be money out. And the money out has to be distributed against various budgets. And some are fixed, like a mortgage, right?
Sure.
And some are variable based on what we care about right now.
Yeah.
That simple practice allowed us, when I first downshifted into part-time work and then eventually paused, to say, okay, how are we moving money around?
Yeah.
And by the way, for us, based on the cost of childcare, it was a net based on what I was making at the time. But for some people, it's less of a financial no-brainer, right? And so we've seen couples who've done that exercise. And for them, there was a couple in Colorado. They were assigning their budget categories for the year based on the shift in income. It was cutting family trips. That was it. And dining out.
Sure.
For another family in the Bay Area that we interviewed, they could no longer live in the Bay.
Right.
And so they moved to Virginia Beach for that period because that was important to them. You can see how these shifts are always possible, but they have to be, or not always, but often more feasible than at first glance, as long as it is a shared calculation and you get creative about what the trade-offs are.
Yeah, we had another guest, Emil Niazian, and we were talking about really thinking about it as family values, right? What is it important for you to be spending money on, regardless of if it's two incomes or one income? It's such an important thing because inevitably there are going to be things that you have to give up. And that's not necessarily a bad thing because you get other things in return.
Well, and it's actually, I'm not going to say it's a romantic exercise, but it's definitely one that challenges you to get closer and on the same page. So even if it's not about childcare and it's about, at the top of the year, we might say it's really important to us to build community.
Yeah.
And so we're going to invest. We're not going to go on family trips this year. And we're actually going to take that money and put it into hosting 2 big community-wide gatherings. That's really important to our family. And so you can see how you're moving money around based on your values. And that's constantly iterative. And I do think this concept of coming back and deciding over and over again, just like with ambition, it applies to finances. Because if you are the partner who's working out of the home, there may come a time where you say, like, I'm actually craving a pause. And we've seen that with couples, right?
Yeah.
The other partner says, I want to downshift for a period.
It's my turn. The stepping back from a career to focus on family life doesn't have to be forever, right? It could be for a year, it could be 2, it could be 5. So how are you hearing from community about how they make that work, how they make that decision for how long they want to take this pause?
I think oftentimes you see, first of all, pauses happen or shifts happen at transition periods in family life. So one of the big tropes is that there's only one time to take a career break, and it typically is when you've had your child. It is actually not often when you've had your first child. It's often if you add a multiple child, if your child has aged into some sort of neurodivergence and there's a diagnosis, there's a family relocation. You see a big uptick around now of career shifts around the teen years because the hours, especially after school, feel sacred. I heard a mom say, I'm actually on my 3rd career pause. I paused when the kids were young, then I paused when we got a diagnosis. And then when my child was a teen, I wanted to be able to pick them up and hear the conversations that were happening in the back of the car. And so, you see in moments of recalibration around transitions in family life. Inversely, as kids age out of more challenging or demanding years, you see women say, well, I have more time available to me. How might I want to use that time in the workforce and or investing in my development? And how might I start to ease my way back to work of meaning? Well, we do see, which is really interesting, and I think I mentioned before, we commissioned a survey in 2023 of 1,000 members of the general population, 1,200 women in paused or downshifted careers. When you ask them how they rank the values of their future work, flexibility is still number 1, even when they transition back.
Right.
Then comes less stress.
Yeah.
And then comes salary. So what's interesting is even as women shape their next chapter, the demands of family life have not reduced. They've shifted. And so women, and I say this often, family life is not just the first 3 years of parenthood.
Yeah.
It's a long, long game.
It's
and
really
so
important.
regardless, work needs to be able to work alongside it. And I think women are acutely aware of that after a career break.
And unfortunately, we're seeing sort of a rollback of that, right? I feel like when you did that survey in 2023, we were still coming off the tail end of the pandemic where people were still working from home. There was more flexibility. And these days, it's a lot of people being called back to the office. Other thing that I think is really interesting about the Power Pause community and some of the women that I've gotten to interact with is a lot of them have this sort of entrepreneurial side project that they're working on. These brilliant women, and the 9-to-5 work world, which, it's not 9 to 5 these days. It's 24 hours in most cases. Just doesn't work for them, but they're building really cool things on their own. So I'm curious, what are you seeing there? Is that a failure on the part of corporate America for not creating more flexibility at work? Or is it just an example of how these women, are able to really balance two things, but in different ways than we expect them to.
Well, I think part of this is we're looking at a new era of women's experience entering into motherhood.
Yeah.
Going back to why we need that fresh narrative about women shifting their careers.
Yeah.
They're coming into motherhood at an average age of 30, and it skews older on the coast. And so they're coming in with work experience, education experience, which allows them more opportunities because they have that foundation. Then they have access to digital tools and technologies that never existed, certainly not in 1970, not at this scale in the 90s or the early aughts. And so we have this world where women are able to access creative opportunities or learning or exploration during a career shift or pause in a way that was never possible before.
Right.
And so that collides with this other amazing reality, which is when you step into a career pause, you suddenly have this opportunity once you get past the initial shock and grief of, wait, like, who am I if I can't just say I run brand? And by the way, I need to educate my husband on his dependence on me. Once you get past all of that, then you fall into this potential pitfall, which is, okay, well, what will make this time successful for me? And I think oftentimes you see women say, well, I guess it's about my kids and like how well they're doing. And then, cut to like the kid pushes another kid on the playground and they're like, well, that can't be my success metric. And so that's the point where we really want to be able to say, well, after a lifetime or at least a decade and a half of people telling me success was this, this is when you get your pay bump, this is when you get your promotion. Now I have this opportunity to figure out what success really is. And I think this is a moment where women can write down your ideal day in 5 years, not because that's going to be who you're going to be, but because when you read it and like really word dump, like who are you spending time with? What are you spending time on? How are you volunteering in the school? What's your relationship like with your partner? What do your friends seem like? What are your leisure hobbies? Because that's going to start to reveal to you what your actual goals are. So if I word dumped on a page in 2018, I saw this version of myself that was writing more. I saw a version of myself that was much more calm than I was. And I saw a silly household, like a playful household. And suddenly from there, I could think, okay, well, what are the family goals, personal goals, and professional goals that this reveals to me? And so let's focus on the professional goal. The professional goal suddenly was, I want to be able to write about women. And I had no experience doing that besides through the lens of a brand until then. But I had Squarespace available to me and Instagram available to me and a lot of naps and night times available to me. So I broke that into, okay, I'm going to write 3 blog posts a week and 5 Instagram posts a week. And that was the foundation of what obviously grew, but maybe someone else doesn't have as linear of a track and they start to explore that. And then it reveals to them, actually, I want to follow this curiosity. And I think being deliberate about using this time to grow and explore allows women to connect to that entrepreneurial energy. And to your point about the rollback, the flip side of that is you see 51% of women make up the entrepreneurial base in this country. And one of the most beautiful parts about that is women follow their curiosity during these career shifts, allow themselves to explore, use technology available to build that on their own terms. Then 5 to 10 years later, I'm using my own example, it grows into somewhat of a sustainable business. And then they hire other mothers. Because we understand that 20 hours of another mother or 10 hours of another mother is more important to this work because it comes with perspective, it comes with efficiency, it comes with creativity. And we are creating our own future of work through that. And I will say it takes a while.
Of course it does.
Right? I think one of the myths of women in entrepreneurship or mothers in entrepreneurship is like you start and you're immediately going to make money and get validation. And neither of those things are true. You have to be willing to be misunderstood for a long period of time. And I think our culture has done a disservice, certainly to stay-at-home moms, by making women who take career breaks feel like a 1970s trope. But we've also done a lot of damage for women who are investing in side projects. We call it lifestyle projects. We call it Instagram things. We call it hobbies. And then we shame women in investing in things that are made to seem frivolous, when in reality, it can be an idea that has immense impact and then allows and empowers more workers to contribute to it in flexible terms, right? This is meaningful work. And I think the real next piece of this is allowing women to be able to shape work that works.
Let's talk really tactical for a minute. You want to stay home with your kids. What is the conversation that you have with your husband or your partner? What is the conversation that you have at work? And what is the conversation that you sort of have with like the outer world? Like, what does that look like?
So you're at least 6 months ahead of time, you're
Yeah.
budgeting. So you and your partner are sitting down and you together are looking at the budget and you're trying to see if this is feasible. At 6 months out or 3 months out at a minimum, you might say, you know what, we want to try this on for size and see how we're going to live on one income. I've seen couples take one income. So if a woman is pausing their career, take her salary and put it in a savings account.
It's amazing if you can do that. It's
Right.
such a game changer.
And because they're just testing it.
Yeah.
And by the way, then it gives her a little cushion on the side. You're deciding ahead of time that you're on the same page about that interdependence.
Right.
And if not, I cannot be more clear about this, that you do not pause at that time, right? You may continue the conversation. You might bring in a financial advisor. You might go to couples therapy to have a conversation, but that is not the time to make a big career shift. You can still make room, and this goes to the conversations with the manager. There are more ways to make room for motherhood than fully pausing.
Right.
And I think that's a big piece of this conversation. I think I mentioned early on, I went part-time first. I think a lot of this is deciding what you're optimizing for.
Right.
If you're optimizing for more time with your kids, maybe try on a part-time schedule.
Sure.
If you're optimizing for more headspace, if it's feeling too stressful. I had a woman in Dallas tell me that she's actually still working full-time, but she turned down a management opportunity and moved on to a different project. So she was able to just be able to turn off at 5 p.m.
Really smart.
So there's ways in which to communicate with your manager about what you're optimizing for. Now, there are women who I think the sort of demands of childcare combined with the stress in the home, combined with fatigue with what they're doing currently, reach a place of, I just want to reset. And that's a very different conversation. But I think the more open you can be with your manager in terms of, I'm craving this, I think it creates a collaborative environment, because when you are resigning, that is when you can do your best networking.
Right.
Meaning like you are essentially building your bridge back before you even leave. And so you are, even if you didn't love parts of your job, you are not like trauma dumping on your boss at this time.
Yeah.
You are saying, I've really loved being here. I want to leave you guys in a really good place.
Yeah.
And so, maybe it's a month out, maybe it's 6 weeks. And while you're leaving, you're taking potential mentees or mentors out for coffees.
Right.
So I think that's another piece that's often overlooked, because I think we have inherited this idea that a career pause is a career ender. And like we've talked about, you never know what a year is going to feel like or 2 years, and you want to preserve those options.
Leaving a job where you go every day, you really need to have community so that you're not home with your kids by yourself, which can be really lonely.
Well, I think first, knowing that it's going to feel uncomfortable for a little bit, I think is a big piece. When you got to college for the first time, it felt uncomfortable, right? It's going to feel different. And slowly you get to decide, well, how do I want to spend these days? And what sort of anchors in the day? You create rhythms that don't just have to be about the kid. Just because you're a stay-at-home mom, I don't like that language, but it does not mean you have to be a super mom.
Right.
And you don't have to bake and volunteer and go to the playground and do arts and crafts projects and you can pick and choose deliberately, well, what are the parts of the day I need? If I need community, which I really think motherhood is like an invisible thread that connects us all. So it allows for maybe not forever friends, but connection.
I think that bit about forever friends is so important. I think that with mom friends, it often is that closeness in the moment when you're going through a similar experience can be really important. And so understanding that these friends are different than work friends.
There's very few other environments. College is actually one of them. Where you get those repeat chance encounters.
Yes.
And repeat chance encounters is actually the recipe for friendship.
Yeah.
You are going to the same playground. You're going to the same coffee shop, maybe.
Yeah.
And so building those into your day-to-day where you're going to bump into a community of people and build that muscle of small talk. Small talk is an underrated skill, right? What starts as, I really love your diaper bag.
Yeah.
Or what pediatrician do you go to?
Right.
Very quickly, the next time is like, what what are you working on these days? What were you doing previously? And then someone says like, oh, I'm actually thinking about a children's clothing company. And like, oh, I'm interested in merchandise. Suddenly you see this collaboration, you know? And I think motherhood gives you that immediate common ground, but then also opens up a level of vulnerability if you're open to it. And I just think there's so much to be said for mom friends are actually amazing networking.
Yeah.
We think of networking as just done in professional spaces.
Right.
Networking is just relationships.
Yeah.
And relationships can be bred anywhere. And actually, when women return to work, the first people they turn to are their mom friends.
Really quickly, return to work. How do you explain this pause?
So I think you should use whatever language feels comfortable to you.
Yeah.
I have seen women put power pause on
really
their
cool.
LinkedIn, which is
That must feel really good.
incredibly cool.
Yeah.
I've also seen career break, which LinkedIn now provides. I also love career sabbatical for family life.
Yeah.
Right. And
Yeah.
I have some incredible examples of this in the last chapter of the book, but I think this idea of really owning with clarity and honesty about what you shifted your career for.
Yeah.
We got some great advice from a HR recruiter at Netflix who said, I'm just so glad that women are owning it, because the worst than not owning it is if there's just a random gap and you don't know why.
Right.
And if it's family life, that's very clear. And so I think we have this trepidation around saying that out loud, but I think that's important. I think under that, you want to then include all of the sub-bullets of your day-to-day that are relevant to your experience, because we gloss over that intellectual and emotional labor and all the non-traditional experience, right, that you've accumulated. So the best example I always give is this woman down in North Carolina. She did an exercise in the book, which I very much recommend. It's this idea of serious self-study, opening an iPhone note or a Google Doc, and you're basically jotting down any moment where you feel proud of yourself or lit up. So that could be you listen to this podcast and you feel curious about something, so you write that down. Or it can be something that you did at school drop-off or a conversation you navigated really well with your partner, and you're writing all of these random things down. The reason why is because this woman, in her example, looks back after a year of jotting this down, and she sees one bullet in particular stand out, which was reorganizing her kids' bus route. Her kids were not, no joke. Her kids were not being picked up efficiently, so she managed the coordination with the town to figure out this new bus route.
It's amazing.
She's looking at it and she's like, wow, I really did a lot to get that done.
Yeah.
And the project management I really enjoyed. So maybe that's actually a part of my story I want to double click on.
Yeah.
Right. So she starts to think like, how can I build that part of my storyline as I re-enter? When she puts together her resume under career sabbatical for family life, her top bullet was implemented highly technical infrastructure change to local organization, because that is what she did. And whether you are running the PTA, whether you're advising your partner's law firm on their marketing, there are so many of these examples that while unpaid have relevance.
Right.
And I think being able to make sure you're keeping track of those so you can then put them into Claude and have it rewrite it for you into a way that's applicable is incredibly, incredibly powerful.
I love that. That's a great story to end on. Thank you so much, Neha. I really so admire what you've built with Power Pause.
Oh, thank you for having me. I love these conversations.
Thanks so much for being here. Be sure to follow Family Money wherever you get your podcasts.